greater change. And part of it was a recognition, coming from a recognition that the world is changing. I'm a child of the 60s. So my parents married in the late 40s, early 50s. And my father was a Jewish educator. And they belonged to the generation of what I would call now good citizens. You know what I mean? People who, they got married, they joined a congregation, they enrolled their children in Hebrew school or religious school that met multiple hours, multiple days a week. They were lifers. They were in for the duration. In many cases, the synagogue and the synagogue school was the complement or the supplement to what happened in the home. And so it went. But the world has changed. Over the past quarter century, we've seen such change. Just think about it. Think about the generation that was born after 1980. So my son and his peers, many of whom are starting families right now. They know a world where cable, satellite, cell phones, and the internet make global communication ubiquitous. Mass customization gives consumers the opportunity and the power to get what they want, when they want it, and where they want it. Institutions can no longer expect loyalty. There's no brand loyalty in the world. More than half of all Jewish families have someone in it who was not born Jewish. Jews enjoy unfettered access to wealth, to education, to power. And the flip side is everybody eats bagels. I don't know if the case is here in Canada as well, but we know in the United States there are people who, when their children turn 13 or so, have something that mimics a bar mitzvah, that non-Jews use ketubot, that really aren't ketubot, but they like having them, marry under a chuppah because they've adopted. They think that certain traditions are great. Women serve alongside men as religious leaders and community leaders. Israel is seen very differently than for my parents' generation and even for my generation. It's seen as both a troubled occupier and a high-tech power, and those kind of rival one another. High-level Jewish studies are available at every elite university. Not the case in the past. And the web makes a virtual library available to anybody. It's true of Jewish sources. It's true that there isn't a filter and people need to know differently how to make sense of it, but it's there. And most importantly, Jewishness is being reinvented individually in dozens of traditional and non-traditional ways. So, the changes in the world in general, the changes in the Jewish community mean that the environment of Jewish education is changing. Participation in Jewish education today is a matter of choice. It's not a given. There's a greater diversity among families and learners. There probably was a great diversity among learners in the past. We just weren't so attuned to multiple intelligences and how to address them. Some families are settling for programs that they find less than optimal because we've been held hostage by the phenomenon of bar mitzvah. So they come in grudgingly, just for the service, for the preparation for both the service and the service that they want, and then they're out of there, and there isn't a connection between what happens in their lives. And increasing numbers of families are opting for alternative substantial numbers of children receive no Jewish education across North America, and that includes other communities in Canada as well. The figure of about 50% not receiving Jewish education at this point is probably true, but it's growing. And there's a real paucity of real alternatives, different ways in for people who are not satisfied with even the excellent approaches that we have. And I've got to say, the past day, yesterday, here in Toronto, has been enormously illuminating for Deborah and for myself. We've been reading a lot about the programs that you have in place. That's very different than meeting with the people who are innovating in those programs. And we are really impressed with the number of sparks and the beginnings of great ideas, and we really are excited about the opportunity to be working and to nurturing and to fan those wonderful flames. So, as a result, at JESNA we've been giving a lot of thought, we're big on metaphors, you're going to learn that about us, to how do we need to be thinking differently about education. And we went to a medical metaphor that others in the world of education, different forms of education, have been thinking about. And it's a comparison of vaccination versus wellness. So when we think about Jewish education and how it has been depicted in the past, and actually when we talk more about when we talk to real people here in your community, but when we talk to the consumers, the learners, the families in other communities, and we hear them talk about what the goals are of Jewish education and why you need to be involved in it and what success looks like, it all comes down, this is a translation on our part of what they're saying. It's prophylactic. It is to avoid the much feared phenomenon of assimilation. It's professionally administered. The educators do it to the person very much like a vaccination. You go to your doctor, you go to, in the States, you can go to pharmacies now for your flu shot. So, it's to avoid a disease, it's administered by somebody else, the learner's sitting there passively, you get the shot. It's disconnected. It's disconnected from everything else that you do. It's a one-off. It has a limited effect. The flu shot. It only works for particular strains of the flu virus. It only works for a limited amount of time. There's a batch approach. Again, only for a limited piece of it, and it can work for some and not for others. It works for some viruses and not for others. And it's really not intrinsically rewarding. So let's think alternatively about the wellness model, again, from the medical point of view. Let's think about exercise or yoga that I especially appreciate. Doing it is life enhancing. While it's going on, it's helpful. An individual works with guides. They've got to do it themselves. It's active. It's encompassing and embedded in life. For me, my yoga practice is something that is not something that I just do and then I move on. It affects everything about my whole day. And it affects the whole person, not just my ability to withstand the flu. It's individualized, but it's social. Even runners who run alone have a community of runners, and they're always talking to each other about the shoes and the warm-ups and where they're going to be, even if they run alone. And it's intrinsically rewarding. Now, you do it yourself. Think about Jewish education. What would it mean to stop thinking about Jewish education as being the vaccination model, and think about it instead as the wellness model? And what can we do to change the culture in our community to be thinking about it that way? So that brings us to WOW. What's WOW? It's a transformative project. And the whole idea is to create a wonderful new world of community-based Jewish education here in Toronto, as opposed to incremental improvements in individual institutions. In a lot of communities where we're working, we're now working in 6 communities and are on the verge of bringing in a couple more to the family of WOW communities. There have been wonderful initiatives, either sponsored by a community as a whole or through individual congregations and other providers that work on individually improving the skills of the educators, introducing curriculum. But it hasn't been necessarily in those instances. They have raised the bar, no doubt. They have really improved the offering. But it has not been transformative, and it's been incremental in terms of institution by institution by institution. So WOW, in distinction, is based on the vision that you create. There have been people that we've had conversations with who said, so what's the content? What's the program? What are you bringing to us? Again, remember, we're your coach. We're not going to define or prescribe specifically what you're going to do. We're going to help you and bring resources and expertise to turn into reality this new transformed world. It's going to be built on a solid base that you've already created through your own programs and innovations. No throwing away babies with bathwater. We are totally opposed to that. It's an important component of what Ed referred to in terms of Toronto's plan to address 6 priorities that have been proposed by the Community Capacity Building team. I don't know if you want to say a sentence about the community capacity building.
Sure. So in our planning, we've established this idea of community capacity building, and within the area of the vulnerable, seniors, with education, newcomer emerging communities, with culture, we're looking to find all the many different ways we can help build the metaphor again of a highway, and the challenge is what are the ways to access the highway. There are ramps that you go up on a highway, and so we're calling them portals, ways, many ways for the different parts of our community to be connected. The education field is what we're talking about today, but it's part of that larger initiative of the Federation to move there. So we're building ramps, connectors, we're looking to leverage the authority and the strengths that you have. We want to, of course, bring in innovation and entrepreneurial energy. We're talking about excellence, and of course, implicit in all this is your leadership, and you're helping to build that. And all that's part of this exercise by Federation, the direction the Federation is taking of trying to encourage and expand and strengthen our affiliation.
And so WOW is the venue or the playing field for this to happen in the area of Jewish education for families and kids who are in public and private education venues. And basically, this is a partnership. This is a continental local partnership that we provide our expertise to support your expertise. So what's WOW based on? There are a number of design principles that our Littman Camper Institute, headed up by the amazing John Butcher, have developed that to say what is it that we need to be attending to when we want to ensure a vibrant Jewish future. Number 1,